Hello, everyone. My name is Kit Robinson. I am an English teacher at Aurora Central High School in Denver, and I am joined by the marvelous Angeline Boulley. So your book, Firekeeper's Daughter, and I keep it on my desk at all times just so my students can see it. It's front and present all the time. It's such a beautiful story, and it's so incredible, and I think it has a lot to share for all students, but it did take you a little bit of time to write it, as I understand. So where did this story come from? What inspired it? What motivated you?
I had the idea when I was 18, and that was when one of my friends who went to a different high school told me about a new guy senior year, and she thought he was my type, and it turned out that he wasn't. And there was a drug bust at the end of the school year, and it turned out that the new guy was an undercover cop. But I remembered thinking, what if we had met and liked each other? And then the more realistic part of my brain took over. And it was like, what if it wasn't that he liked me, but he needed my help? And why would some undercover drug investigation need the help of an ordinary Ojibwe girl? And
Mhm.
that idea just stayed with me. I went on to college. I ended up working for different Indian tribes in Michigan. And I think even though I didn't start writing until I was 44, so what, like 28, 28 years
Right.
later, whatever, 26 years, I was still working out the pieces of the puzzle of answering that question of why an undercover drug investigation might need the help of an ordinary Ojibwe girl. And then thinking, okay, if the drugs were if there was a cultural component, if they had been messed with something involving the culture, and if she knew chemistry and knew her traditional medicines, knew her language and teachings, she actually would be the ideal person to help with the investigation. And so that's really where the story started. But over 10 years of writing, it just got a lot of layers. And I realized it was really a coming of age story dressed up like a thriller mystery type story. But at its heart, it's about claiming your identity and finding your place in your community and in the world.
Mm. That's beautiful. There's so many levels to this book that students resonate with, and I myself resonated with. The identity, the self-discovery, and you did touch a little bit on the law enforcement aspect of it in that first question. And I think that's something that even students who don't necessarily have a background with Native American and Indigenous identities, they still do have tension with law enforcement, especially in today's world. And I'm wondering if you can discuss a little bit that tension with uh, law enforcement, both on the local tribal level and then also the federal level. How does that interact with you and your audience? And just kind of describe the research that went into that. Like what is the reality of that situation? And then also what additional research did you have to do to supplement that?
Sure. Well, tribes do not have jurisdiction on their own tribal territories to prosecute major crimes. And, the Major Crimes Act it was in the 1800s, and it identified, major crimes like murder uh, and, and only the federal government has jurisdiction of those. Now, the Violence Against Women Act, when it was reauthorized previously, it allowed tribes to have that jurisdiction to prosecute non-native individuals that had committed crimes on tribal land. But then it stalled in Congress with reauthorization. And the basic gist is that there are politicians that don't believe that tribal justice, that tribal courts could enact justice and provide due process. And, and that's just such an insult to tribes. Um, and so I did want to touch upon that because so many people, so many non-natives don't know, but um, some native people don't know that either. And
Mhm.
so I really wanted to address that and bring it down to a personal level where someone that you have gotten to know, care about, that a crime happens and she gets no justice.
Mm, it's incredible.
When it
Um,
comes to my research, though, I am friends with a retired FBI agent who's
oh,
Native.
wow.
He's Blackfeet. His name is Walt Lamar. And we met through mutual friends, and he was an incredible resource for me. And then I also, had other sources at the federal level and state level. And really, I guess a very fascinating part of my research was learning how to make meth from the state police. So
That's
I
cool.
was able, because of contacts that I had and research that I had done, I was able to attend a workshop that the Michigan State Police Academy put on. And it was about different methods of methamphetamine production and how to identify clandestine meth labs. And,
Mm.
so now that said, if I were in a room with ingredients, I would not know the first thing of what to do. But, at the time it was like getting, the paraphernalia right and the types of things that would be,
Mhm.
there. So,
That's amazing. Those chapters with Donis and Jamie, like when they have to go through all those courses, I remember thinking like, is this real? Is this actually how this works? That's so crazy to know.
mhm,
Um, I think even though there are like thriller elements to it, there is a lot that is just so realistic to it. I mean, like all of it though is so realistic, and that shows with how much research you put into it, but then also your own personal experiences. Like these are crazy, crazy experiences that I don't know if anyone else who has had that. Um, but on a more like relatable level, this the theme that Donis has of living in these two worlds, especially with her grandmothers. She has her Italian French grandmother who has like really kind of backwards ideas, and then she has her Ojibwe family, and it's just this like connection and this really strong sense of belonging, even though she's not legally part of the tribe. And I think that's a lot that I personally resonate with a lot. And I was wondering if you could talk about how much of you is Donis, because she's such like a real strong character that it would be interesting to know, like, where did she come from really?
I think in the beginning, like the first draft, when I first started writing, Donis was a lot like me. We're both light-skinned Ojibwe women, and with an Ojibwe dad and a non-native mom. I didn't grow up on the reservation, and I had a lifetime of hearing, oh, you're not like them. Oh, but um, just different microaggressions that make you feel other than,
Mm.
and also recognizing my privilege. Because of where I grew up and because of how I look, I was able to have privilege that I could reveal my heritage or not. And my cousins, I have cousins that there's no denying, that they're native and they live in a town that doesn't like natives. And so just being aware of that privilege. So I think initially she started out a lot like me, but as I continued writing and I think gained confidence that I wasn't writing my story, I was writing her story. And the
Mm.
more strong her voice became, the more her interests really diverged from mine. I've never played hockey a day in my life, and I'm not good in science or math. So, all of that was like specific to her and just helped fully form her.
Mm.
So yeah.
That's awesome. I I mean, that's so powerful to hear. Not just that when I read the book, I felt so connected to Donis as a light-skinned Cherokee woman. And also the fact that like for a while my parent or my family had denied like attribution to the tribe. And so now it feels like it's
Mm.
lost to me, even though that's something that I feel so proud and so strongly connected to. It just makes that character so much more powerful, so much more meaningful for me to have that insight. Um, this book, I mean, I can't say it enough. It's just so powerful. It's so strong. And I feel like sometimes, especially when it is like a specific cultural focus, I work in Metro Colorado, and so I feel like a lot of my students are like, well, that book's not for me because it's not about me. And I'm wondering, who did you envision this book for, if you could talk about that, and what power and strength did you hope readers might gain from this story?
That's a great question. Originally, I wanted to write it for Ojibwe teens, for Native teens in particular, Ojibwe, or Anishinaabe teens. And I think the more that I wrote and realizing there's this quote that in the particular, we find the universal. That's a quote from an Irish writer, James Joyce. And I think that because Donis's story is so specific, Great Lakes, Upper Peninsula, but yet people can still identify with her. And I wanted the story to have a wide market. And so I did want it to reach uh, teens, native or non-native, and I wanted it to reach young adult readers and adults. And I had an author event last night, and half the audience were elderly, and they just absolutely like loved the characters and had their favorite, elder that they identified with. And so I'm just very thankful of the reception that the book has gotten, and that people of all ages have enjoyed it. I will say that it feels like the reactions that mean the most to me are like when an Ojibwe woman comes up to me at an event and lets me know that she felt seen and that I got it right. And that was what I really wanted, was to tell a story that resonated and told 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 an authentic story.
Um, One thing that I talk about this a lot with colleagues and in professional development settings, but sometimes I do feel like when I discuss Native American issues or Indigenous issues, it's almost because it's like more palatable coming from me because I am white passing, that it's like this pressure is on me that I'm like, well, now I have to speak for everyone because you don't want to
Oh,
ask other people.
yeah,
Um, and so there is what I thought was really, really great, or another aspect that I thought was great about this book that you is mentioned a few times, is this idea of um, making certain information, like providing windows to certain experiences, but then also making sure that there's curtains to other experiences. And I think that's a really interesting balance to create, especially with people who may not have intimate experience with tribal interactions and tribal relations. Can you just discuss that a little bit more? What was that process like of having to be intentional with some information?
sure. Because some information, in particular ceremony, that is not intended for anyone beyond that ceremony. And
Mm.
so I was very conscious of things that I did not want to include in the story. And I had this mantra while I was writing, and it was, I write to preserve my culture and I edit to protect it. And so knowing what to take out, what to leave out is more important than what you put in, I think. I checked with my dad. I checked with other, pipe carriers. I talked with other, spiritual and cultural leaders that I respect, and explained, I really talked about what I wanted to do with the book, and that responsibility that I felt of sharing only what felt appropriate to share. So I feel pretty comfortable with where I drew that line, but recognizing that, hey, every tribe is different. And, depending on who your teachers are, it could be a very different line. And that is entirely, personal. I did get a comment, I think on social media from someone from a tribe out in the Southwest. And she was like, man, you Northern Indians give it all away. And I respect that, the nation that she came from drew that curtain very differently.
Mm,
And, I think having more stories out there lets people know the nuance, the differences.
hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that because I feel like so many times, um, when you find out that like maybe two different people are indigenous, but we're from different tribes, people are like, oh, you must have all this in common. It's like we do have like different different ceremonial procedures, different values, that kind of thing. So it is interesting to like share that you know there are a lot of different tribes, and we do have different perspectives on a lot of different things. You had
But
mentioned that. Oh,
oh,
go
I
for
was
it.
going to say what cracks me up is no matter what conference or meeting I go to, a Native person will come up to me and they'll be like, "You look just like my aunt. Um, do you know so and so?" And the funny thing is, like, when I do know that person, because sometimes our circles are pretty small,
Right.
it's not like 6 degrees of separation, it's more like
Yeah.
2 or 3.
Right.
But yeah, that's always a beautiful thing. I love when I'm at conferences and someone introduces themselves in the language. And when I hear Anishinaabe, I'm like, "Ooh, I want to go meet that person. I want to go talk to them." So
That's amazing. You had mentioned how closely you worked with tribal elders and even your dad. As I understand it, your dad is a ceremonial firekeeper.
yeah.
What was that? What emotions surrounded being able to bring that heritage into a young adult novel and have it so widely received?
Well, it's great. Honestly. My dad strikes ceremonial fires. He does it at, fasting camp, at young warrior camp, at, women's camp, and different things in my tribal community, in our tribal community, and in other tribal communities that, that really like what he does. And he likes to take that night shift taking care of the fire, and he will sit there with anyone and he will answer questions. He will tell stories. He maintains the protocols of, how you act around that fire. And, but yeah, he's always so willing to share that knowledge with people who want to hear it. Um, so yeah, I'm really proud that I'm a firekeeper's daughter in real life. And yeah.
That's beautiful. This next question is purely selfish, just for my gain. In education, there is a lot of tension, especially recently, with equitable and anti-racist instruction, and kind of the public focus on like what exactly are we teaching students and how are we teaching it. But I'm curious to learn your insight about how you envision this novel fitting into the discussion around education reform and also anti-racist education.
Sure. Um, I think that those states that do Indian education for all, I think that's a really great thing, because in Michigan, it's not just Native kids that need that,
Mhm.
to provide Indian education to, because these are students that when they grow up, they're going to be on city council or school boards, or, different things interacting. And the more they know about tribes and the history of the state and why this came to, and the land that they're on and the story about that. I think Indian education for all is a really good thing. I think there's so much misunderstanding about critical race theory. Um, and so that's a whole another, it's kind of exponentially,
Yeah.
and but I really think that people need to know the history of the land that they're on.
Mm,
So yeah.
awesome. These next couple of questions are a little bit less serious. I understand that you have some exciting news about a Netflix and Higher Ground production. Can you tell
Yes.
us a little bit about that?
I sold the film rights to my story to the Obamas. They are going to make a Netflix series of my book, and I'm just so thrilled. So they have a deal with Netflix to do documentaries, feature films, series, and other projects. And Firekeeper's Daughter will be their first series, and I'm just thrilled. I'm just thrilled. And the thing is that there were other production companies that were interested in acquiring the film rights. And when I talked with each company, I would say the same thing. And I said, representation is a core value for me.
Mhm.
Um, and I said, I believe in representation, not just in front of the camera, but to have native creative talent behind the camera, in the writer's room, at all different levels of production. And there was one production company, and the guy was like, "Oh, are there any native screenwriters?" And I just thought, like, like little kindergarten, but just that kind of like, why would you pitch yourself for this story if
Right.
you don't know the first thing about it? I'm not going to do Indians 101 with you. And
Yeah.
Higher Ground Productions was completely the opposite. They were like, absolutely, these are the networks we're plugged into, and if you have other people that you're interested in bringing on board, please let us know. And they've just, that's the control that an author has, whether or not to sell those movie rights or film rights, and who you do business with. Beyond
Mhm.
that, I don't get casting approval or things like that. So really, it was trusting that it
Mm.
would be a quality production. And yep,
If you're gonna trust anyone, I feel like the Obamas are
that's
just
what I
just the
think
people to
too.
do that. Who's more trusting?
Mhm.
Uh, so other than this huge, huge news, which is so exciting, I will be one of the first people to watch this. What's next for you?
I'm working on book 2, and my deal with Macmillan was for a 2-book deal. And I would say that if book 1 was Indigenous Veronica Mars, maybe Indigenous Nancy Drew, book 2 is it's not a traditional sequel. It's still set in my tribal community, but it has a different main character, but you'll
Mm.
see familiar faces. And I would say it's like Indigenous Lara Croft, but instead of raiding tombs, the main character is reclaiming ancestors from museums and private collectors to bring back home. And one of her heists goes very, very badly. So, and I left a lot of Easter eggs in book 1. So hopefully you can figure out you know,
What's
yeah,
there?
what's
That's
there.
amazing. Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
That gave me like chills. Like, huh, now I need to read this. I will pre-order this book. Awesome. Thank you so, so much. I am so appreciative of your time answering these questions. Is there any last thing that you want to share with everyone?
Well, first, I want to thank you for that teacher's guide that you worked on. It is so wonderful. I mean, it really, I think there are teachers who want to be more inclusive of, Native literature, but they're so afraid of doing something wrong that
Mm,
they opt to not do anything. And
mhm.
resources, free downloadable resources like your teacher's guide helps make that easier for teachers to to bring more inclusive voices into what they're teaching. So, and then I will say, I love NIEA. And really, if anyone wants a signed book plate, so I do these little things that's like a little sticker that you can put on your in your book. And if you follow me on social media on Instagram and just private message, DM me and let me know if you want it personalized, and your mailing address. I am happy to sign one, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and get it out to you. So I'm just so appreciative of everyone who takes the time to, read the book or read part of the book. I'm really appreciative. And so miigwech.
Yeah. I want you to know I'm just writing a note on my to-do list to DM you for a sticker.
Okay.
So expect that later tonight. So you did mention my teacher's guide. I am going to talk about that just a little bit, how we might
Sure.
include your book in classrooms. And so for those of you watching, the teacher's guide you can find at mackidsschoolandlibrary.com. It is a free teacher's guide, which is very, very cool to have that accessibility for teachers and for everyone, as Angeline said, to have access to that. Real quick, is it visible on the screen? Just to make sure. Perfect. So these are just some pictures that I love, that I think are incredible. Your book obviously has gotten a lot of traction, a lot of notice, and which is very, very cool to have an identity that's not always super visible in young adult literature to have such visibility. And so I'm just gonna go over some ideas, some things I talk about in my teacher's guide about using Firekeeper's Daughter in the classroom. But first I wanna talk about, like, why is it important to build and emphasize different perspectives, specifically Indigenous perspectives? The poet John Trudell, he said that historically speaking, we went from being Indians to pagans, to savages, to hostiles, to militants, to activists, to Native Americans. It's 500 years later and they still can't see us. We are still invisible. That quote speaks to me a lot. I think about that definitely when I get all these questions. It's like, well, speak for Native Americans on this topic. And that's never how people intend it, but that is how it comes off. And I think it's important to understand that Indigenous authors' perspectives and voices in young adult literature is helping to change the idea that we are invisible. It's very, very easy to say, like, Native Americans are people of the past, and yet we still have so many students that share that identity and cherish that identity. And so we need to be bringing in these different perspectives to help change that conversation and making sure that we're creating a shift from transgenerational traumas to now transgenerational legacies, and giving that insight into authenticity of modern Indigenous life and culture. So why does it matter? Tommy Orange, he is just so inspirational in sharing this idea of kind of like that split identity. He says, I'm not half of two things or made up of fractions. I am made up of the whole things that are things unto themselves. So making sure that we see whole students. And we can show that by giving books of teenagers that feel maybe disconnected from their identity, but have such pride in their identity, allowing students to understand that identities are complicated and complex, and there can be a lot of different factors that go into them. Think of the children. I think I'm a lot funnier than other people do, but we do talk a lot in English education, especially the reasons to read more. And I come back to this a lot, especially with young adult literature I read today, of thinking of what is the link to reasons to read more. First of all, Native American and Indigenous culture is foundational to our society. For better or for worse, our history is made up a lot of the history of Native Americans. And the oppression and pain that they have gone through has built our society today in a lot of ways. It's really a shame that we don't talk about it very often because it does limit the understanding of history that our students have. Also having that cultural responsiveness and anti-racism in classrooms, that culturally responsive education. It's not just about like, don't be racist, be a better person. It's also developing empathy and helping students understand all the perspectives that they may interact with, but may feel are silent or hidden. And then developing personal identity. About 2% of students in the United States do identify as Native American, Aborigine, or Indigenous of the Asian Pacific. And so that's actually a relatively large percentage group of our students that may feel uncomfortable or unseen in their identity just because they don't really see a mirror in the classroom. So allowing all these different perspectives can allow students to feel more comfortable and more seen in their own perspectives. So in practice with Firekeeper's Daughter, as I mentioned, there is that teacher's guide from mackidsschoolandlibrary.com. But when we're using this book in the classroom, there's a lot of different things that we can do. My teacher's guide, it goes through a lot of different things, like having a pre-reading activity of thinking about social injustices that we see in all aspects of our society. What's really cool in Aurora is that we can look into like police brutality and discrimination. Silencing protests has been a really big issue in Denver. And so thinking about what actionable change can we make when we identify those issues. And this book does a really great job of teaching students that you don't just have to focus on what's wrong, what's the problem, but you can have the ability to focus on how can you change it for the better. The assistant vice principal of the student affairs at Colorado State University, Albert Bimper, he does talk about, he gives a speech every year. When I was a student at CSU Fort Collins, he said it to my cohort and it has stuck with me years and years later. He said, I want you to love something so dearly and passionately that you will fight to make it better. And I think that's a lot of what Firekeeper's Daughter teaches us, is that there is so much love and passion for our world and our society that we can fight to make it better, because it's not perfect, but we can really, really try hard to make it perfect. And that's just a really beautiful sentiment. So moving past just the societal injustices that we can think about and have the ability to change, we also can think about developing empathy and focusing on true historical understanding, doing our best to use connective tissues of themes, things that all students can relate to, like grief, guilt, justice. These are things that Donis, the main character, goes into in such depth, both explicitly and implicitly. And I think all students can resonate with that. All students can really find a deep connection to that in their ability to make change. And then disrupting the system, creating change, burning it down. Audre Lorde says that you will never dismantle the master's tools or the master's house with the master's tools. And so teaching students that, you know, this is hard. This is hard work to make change. But it's not enough to just say we want change. How can we make it for ourselves? And giving students that space and that opportunity to advocate for change, to see it themselves, and to bolster their ability to really create it and act on it. I'm not going to go super in depth just because it is a very, very long teacher's guide, but those are all the main topics I wanted to focus on that I think teachers can really build and borrow in their own classrooms. So that's all I wanted to share. Based off of that, I want to give Angeline the last word, just because I just feel like this is all about you, all about your book. Any last thoughts? Any last connective ideas?
our stories matter, and no one knows our stories the way that we do. And that's what makes it so important for us to what we want to communicate, what we want to convey, the story we want to tell about ourselves. That's within our power to do. So, yeah, miigwech for everyone's support, and yeah, happy to be here with you.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much, everyone. Please read her book if you haven't already. Please use the teacher's guide to bring these voices into the classroom and share those experiences with students. And have a beautiful day.
Pamapi.